Hi, Panina, Miriam, Claudia. You're a sight for sore eyes. How are you?
I'm good. How are you? I haven't seen you in such a long
I
time.
know. I know. Hey, Brad, Susan, Meryl, Ellen. I know you're there, even though I don't see you. That's okay. Um, so hopefully, everybody had a great week. We're come to, I think, a what for many people is sort of in some ways a troubling Torah portion this week. Because it's at least a portion of it, the part that the portion is named after Pinchas, is kind of a violent um, story of zealotry and fanaticism, one might say, religious zealotry, and certainly manslaughter, if not murder. And at the end of the story, the Pinchas, the character who perpetrates this manslaughter, this murder, is rewarded with blessing, which I think creates some, at the very least, interesting, if not problematic, questions for us, at least as moderns, to talk about. So I brought a bunch of stuff today, a bunch of texts, a bunch of commentaries. There's no way we're going to get through all of it, but we'll get as far as we can. And if history is any indicator, we'll end up in some thoughtful, um, you know, lively conversation about something that may or may not have anything to do with the Torah portion, and that's where we'll go. So on that note, we're going to get right to it here. I can share my screen. Okay, here we go. So we're in kind of the middle of the book of Numbers, the book of Bamidbar. Does anybody want to offer to read just this piece from the Parsha, and then we'll get into some of the commentaries? All right, Jeff, take it. Oh, I think you're muted, Jeff.
Sorry.
There we go.
While Israel was staying at Shittim, the people profaned themselves by whoring with the Moabite women. These women invited the people to the sacrifices for their God. The people partook of them and worshiped that God. Thus, Israel attached itself to Baal Peor, and the Lord was incensed with Israel. The Lord said to Moses, "Take all the ringleaders and have them publicly impaled before the Lord, so that the Lord's wrath may turn away from Israel." So Moses said to Israel's officials, "Each of you slay those of his men who attach themselves to Baal Peor." Just then, one of the Israelites came and brought a Midianite woman over to his companions in the sight of Moses and the whole Israelite community, who were weeping at the entrance of the tent of meeting. When Pinchas, son of Eleazar, son of Aaron, the priest, saw this, he left the assembly, and taking a spear in his hand, he followed the Israelite into the chamber and stabbed both of them, the Israelite and the woman, through the belly. Then the plague against the Israelites was checked.
Okay, right. So that's the scene, right? Pinchas sees this and sort of in a moment of rage and zealotry, right, rushes into the tent and kills them both, the Moabite woman and the Israelite perpetrator. And what is the reaction? So according to the rabbis in the Talmud, the well, I'll read the text here, right? So this is not, just as a quick aside. Generally, when we talk about the Talmud and we bring a piece of text from the Talmud, 98% of the time, we're talking about the Babylonian Talmud. So there were actually two Talmuds. The Talmud of of record, the famous one that everybody thinks about, is the Babylonian Talmud, which is a product, not surprisingly, of exile in Babylon, and much longer, more complete and lengthy than the other Talmud, which is the Jerusalem Talmud, the Rishalmi, which doesn't is much more obscure and generally is not studied to the same extent that the Babylonian Talmud is, other than by academics. But this is a little text from the Jerusalem Talmud, from the Yerushalmi. And it says that the elders of Israel sought to excommunicate Pinchas after this, horrible event, until God hurries in and tells them that, on the contrary, Pinchas should be celebrated, and that God is going to make for Pinchas and for all of his descendants a special covenant that he's going to be, a member of the priesthood for all time, because he took this zealous action on God's behalf, and as a result, redeemed the entire Israelite community, right? How does that land for people? I mean, is Pinchas, I don't know, is he a hero or is he a fanatic?
Well, I have a question.
Please.
So you said this is from Jerusalem Talmud. So is this justification found in the Babylonian Talmud as well?
Great question. I have some text from the Babylonian Talmud a little later. It doesn't hit this exact thing, but yes. I mean, the traditional response, and we're going to get to this at the very end, as to why God ultimately not only doesn't punish Pinchas, but rewards Pinchas,
yeah. But before we get there,
yeah.
What are they trying to justify? I'm not that familiar with Pinchas, but
Yeah.
So is he such a seminal figure in the text? No. So they're not trying to justify someone because he's so meaningful to us.
No, and look, no, absolutely not. And look, I think that it's clear right in the very beginning of the Torah text here what a big deal idolatry and worship of other gods is to to our ancestors, right? I mean, it's, 10 Commandments.
So they're trying to lay the foundations for people stay away from idolatry, otherwise they'll...
Right, stay away from idolatry, and not just idolatry. Don't lust after the gods and traditions of other peoples. Right. If we look at this in kind of an anthropological sense, this entire narrative is still in the time period in which they're building community and they're building a cohesive, religious community, theological community, and trying to say, no, look, we're not like these other tribes. You're not these pagans. You're not these other folks. You're not going to do what they do. You're not going to worship their gods. And if you do, there's severe punishment for that. I mean, remember, this is also in the same space where punishment for violating Shabbat is death. Right? Jeff, I saw your hand up.
It's interesting that it kind of plays up a different point for me. That Pinchas is just an everyday man.
Yeah.
That this lesson is that we, each of us, is capable of having that zealous belief in God's necessary mitzvahs and actions, that it should be a more guiding principle in our life, that we should not be afraid to act in support of God's righteousness, so to speak.
I don't disagree. At what point does that,
cross over? Right.
For some reason, I'm blanking on his name, but right, the Israeli fundamentalist zealot who assassinated Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin. I may be misremembering. But I want to believe he even invoked Pinchas in his justification for what he did. I could be mistaken. I'll do a little homework and find out, because I'm going to be with you all next week and I'll report back. But I'm 90% sure, I have a vague recollection that he used Pinchas as a justification for what he did. So right, I agree, Jeff, that I think we each have the ability. Certainly, I think we're all, whether we realize it or not, I think we're all zealots about particular issues and particular things, whether they're religious or not, in our lives. That, given the right circumstances, who knows? We would do all sorts of things to protect what we believe in or protect those we love. But I think it's a good point. When does it go beyond the when is it beyond the pale? because you have a lot. I mean, this gets into, I think, what's problematic, certainly from a contemporary standpoint, is, one of the critiques that I hear all the time about not Judaism so much, but religion in general is, more people have been killed in the world in the name of religion, in the name of God, than many other things. And this is, in a way, demonstrative of that, right? So how is this different than, a terrorist getting on a bus in Jerusalem and blowing it up because he thinks that, or she thinks that, the folks on that bus are behaving poorly and it's a threat to their livelihood. Brad and then Panina.
Well, I'm sorry, but I'm jumping ahead a little bit because we learned that the woman is the daughter of the Moabite or Midianite. I don't remember, but she's the daughter of the chieftain.
Right.
And you wonder to what extent she is being instrumentalized by her father in some kind of scheming plot.
Interesting.
So she is, in a sense, a double victim, a victim of her father and a victim of Pinchas, or Phineas, or whatever. So, if the Israelite had been the only one killed, I think it would be a little bit different. But we have a woman here who is potentially, I don't know, her action is potentially excusable.
Yeah.
And she is a victim as well. So
I think it's also
disconcerting.
Yeah,
I mean,
absolutely.
why else does the text give us that detail that she was the daughter of the
Right.
chieftain?
Well, I think, interestingly, right, let me just look back here.
It's a little bit further in the text.
No, but I was looking here to say that the God's instruction is, in essence, to kill the men, not to kill the women, right? Kill the Israelite men who are behaving in this way, who are perpetrating this, not necessarily to kill the assuming it's a male-female situation, the female. Pinchas takes it upon himself to do that, which I think is interesting. The other piece, though, that I thought of, Brad, as you were saying that, which never occurred to me before, and I'm not going to go too far down this road because I'm speaking about it tonight at services. But there's sort of two, I would say, big stories in this Parshat. One is the one we're looking at right now with Pinchas. The other is this vignette of these three women called the daughters of a guy named Zelophehad, who again, I'm not going to say more because I don't want to say what I'm going to say tonight and then have nothing to say tonight. But it's an interesting contrast because, without giving too much away for those who don't know the story, the daughters of Zelophehad actually kind of symbolizing this very, in a way, I would say, feminist and a strong sense of women and their role and advocating for themselves and their family and their heirs, which I think, as you were saying this, Brad, about here about sort of her being a victim, I thought that's an interesting dichotomy, sort of, that here you have, in one part of the story, woman kind of portrayed as this victim on both sides, her father and Pinchas, and whoever the guy is that's in the tent with her. And then on the other side of the parsha, you have sort of a more empowered portrait of women presented. And I never drawn that connection before, but I think it's interesting. I saw another hand. Jennifer, maybe? And Panina, I know you had a hand too, and Susan, so we'll get through. Jennifer, did you have a hand up? You still here? Okay, Susan and then Panina.
Oh, all right. I mean, interestingly, that's also the dichotomy that society you just mentioned, Picasso viewing women as either Madonnas or whores. And it's a false dichotomy. Women are people just like men, and there's some that are admirable and some who who aren't. But doesn't from what I've read from commentaries is that God feared sexuality and these orgiastic rites of women, of non-Israelite women, leading men astray by these, orgies and orgastic rites before worshiping Baal. So,
well, which I think is interesting because I think that's a trope that extends far beyond the Torah and beyond Judaism to this motif and idea that women in many cases are harlots and who seduce men. And I mean look at the, I mean even in Homer, right, in the Odyssey, look at the idea of the sirens in the distance, right, that somehow women are these creatures that are destined to lure men away from whatever the straight and narrow, which is, I think, preposterous. But I think that's a trope that definitely is here, but is not unique to the Torah. It doesn't excuse it, but it's certainly not unique. Jennifer, you came back, and I know you had a hand.
Oh yeah, because I was switching from, I was outside on my phone. I'm sorry. Now I'm inside.
Not at all. But I know you had a hand up a few minutes ago. So
yeah, I want to just try to bring another interpretation on a much more personal level to this. Not that it is. I just wanted to say, perhaps it didn't have anything to do with the worshiping of. I mean, everything is plausible. That's why it's so great. Suppose that the problem wasn't that they believed in idolatry. It was that perhaps they just had urges towards these women that they couldn't control. And that's very dangerous because, of course, you see what it leads to. It affects the entire community. Right. And, that's where you get to the roots of anything we feel we can't control, whether it's appetite or God, anything like that, I just wanted to put that out there that could be a kind of, also you could take a personal look at this as
absolutely
well.
That it's in a way about protecting them from themselves. Yes.
And here is Pinchas, if you're saying he's a normal, I don't want to use the word normal, but an average guy, and he either doesn't have these urges or he has gone to great lengths to repress them.
Right.
And here are these guys just going about and doing it. No wonder he feels like stabbing them. Yeah, so, I just wanted
to. No, absolutely.
Yeah.
We're going to do one more, go a little further here. So here's a little kind of snippet of Midrash that when Moses saw how great Pinchas was, he was afraid that he would be chosen as the leader. But he was not pleased with the prospect of having such a zealot as the leader of the Jewish people. And so Moses then asks God that the leader be a tolerant person and not a zealous one. Right? Merle.
He's as overeager in his zealotry as the men who couldn't control themselves with the available women.
Right. In a way, yeah. Go ahead, Merle.
Well, I was just going to, excuse me. I'm thinking of something that's going on in my own congregation here, not my Wilshire congregation, about people who feel they're more, I can't think of the word, but they're better than other people. And they're not tolerant of people with suggestions or concepts as to how to fix the problem. And this reminds me of the same thing, that people are afraid to choose a leader that isn't going to be tolerant. And that's what this says to me, is that people are looking for, I think tolerant is beyond what we think of tolerant. I think tolerant is about fairness and not somebody who is going to be overbearing and controlling.
I think it's a great point, and despite what this may sound like, the statement I'm about to make actually has nothing to do with our current times or politics or civility or any of it. I do think it's very seductive and human nature to gravitate toward leaders who are zealots or zealous, shall we say, about and toward issues that we care about. Right?
Yes.
I mean, we do it, right? We like leaders who are, have the same views on Israel that we do, or the same views on, fiscal policy that we do, or social policies that we do, right?
Anything.
And we have a certain amount of contempt for those who don't, right? For those who support BDS, or for those who are not pro-choice, or who are pro-choice, or who are whatever it is, right? And so, yes, I think that this is an interesting, text, because I agree we need tolerant leaders, and I think that and at the same time it's within human nature to gravitate toward leaders who care about what we care about, maybe even more passionately than we do.
Well, and that bringing, as if we gravitate towards tolerant leaders or tolerant people, then I think we have a better community.
Well, now you're just making too much sense, Merle.
I'm sorry.
Jeff.
I'll go back to dance now.
I think you're mute. There you go.
I had a comment for an earlier portion, but I think I'm going to save it for now. So I appreciate being called on again. And
We're going to go a little further before we get to our next kind of idea and sort of pivot a little bit. So this is Numbers Rabbah. This is Midrash on the book of Numbers. This is Moses' requests of God as Moses is dying. Ribono shel olam, master of the universe, the mind of each and every one is known before you, and none of them are the same as another's. When I am separated from them by death, them meaning the people, I ask of you, please, to set someone over them who will be patient with each and every one according to their uniqueness. Right? This is, again, kind of hitting home that point of Moses really being concerned about the kind of leadership. By the way, Moses was not always the most tolerant and patient leader. Gets himself into some trouble when he loses his temper and his patience a few times over the course of his journey with our ancestors. But, but again, right, this is Moses saying, this is not specifically germane to Pinchas, but Moses again saying, this is, I think, a warning against leaders who are overly zealous, right? Who are fanatical. Okay, so this is a little bit of kind of the tradition, while still acknowledging that Pinchas, is rewarded, painting him as a little bit fanatical, painting him as a little bit overly zealous, and kind of putting him a little bit outside the mainstream, right? However, then switching gears a little bit, a bunch of text here that, and there's more of this actually to be found in the tradition that elevates Pinchas, which I think there's a lot more maybe for us to kind of sink our teeth into and think about why that is. Okay, so this is a prayer. I wouldn't really say prayer. Yeah, I guess that's fine. This is a piece of the weekday Amidah service that you'd find in an Ashkenazi Siddur, and it's sort of a prayer asking for God to protect us from enemies. And the text says, right, let there be no hope for informers, and may all wickedness instantly perish. May all the enemies of your people be swiftly cut off, and may you quickly uproot, crush, rout, and subdue the insolent speedily in our days. Blessed are you, Adonai. I like this translation. Adonai, as my grandmother would have said. Crusher of enemies and subduer of the insolent. It didn't make it into the newest Reformed prayer book, for what it's worth. But, right? Again, not directly referencing Pinchas, but this certainly would, if you put Pinchas' actions in the story from this Parshat next to this piece that, in some traditional communities is still recited, every day, every morning, it seems that Pinchas' actions are God's will and totally justified, right? Penina.
You know, this is condemnation for kind of lesser evils, the insolent. But one also has to admit, which not everyone does, that there is evil, that there are people who do bad
Right.
things regularly, and there is evil, you know. And I mean, the ultimate are the Nazis, but there are others too that commit genocide, that murder, and for a wish to uproot these
Right.
people who could is part of the Jewish tradition too. I mean, the Talmud
For
also
sure.
says if you stand by while
Yeah.
atrocities are being committed, you're part of the problem. So
Look, right. We could just
Can
as
I
easily read this as saying, if we put it in slightly more contemporary language, this is saying, God, get rid of the people who graffiti the side of the temple with anti-Semitic hate speech.
Right.
Often. Penina, you've been waiting patiently.
Okay. So you can hear me now. All right. The Torah, the Ten Commandments is divided into two sections. The first half is what we should do. The second half is what we shouldn't do. And what we read in and the stories in the Bible, in each chapter, you have things that were done right, or things that they were taught to do right. And then there are stories about things that were really bad. And people did really bad things, like Samson, for example. Because of him, we had monarchy, because he was so bad, they never wanted any more judges.
Right.
So I see here instances of things that happen that actually justify the Ten Commandments. That there were things that were done here. Number one, do not murder, lo tirtzach. You have here lo tin'af, do not commit idolatry, or the way they call it here, znut. And then you have here the lashon hara, not to talk about somebody else bad. And we really don't know if the Ten Commandments might have been written after all these things happened.
It's a great point. I would say, we could go through. I think it's more than that. You also have here adultery.
Absolutely, that's what I just said. Right.
Oh, I thought you said idolatry. Sorry, I thought you said idolatry.
Adultery.
You have adultery. You also have idolatry. You have adultery.
Right.
It
could be both.
Right. Everyone here has heard, I think
it's not being loyal to wherever it is.
Right.
And then, like I said, lo tirtzach, which is very important. And then not to use bad language or tell lies about other people. And this is this little paragraph that we just read, Lamalshinim al tia tikva, people who are talking bad about other people, or tell about other people doing other bad things, or whatever you want to call it. So, like I said, to just take those three instances and try to make it something that would be so not ordinary, it's a good thing, but you also have to understand that it's supposed to show kind of like a balance between the stories that were teaching you about good stuff and then the stories that were teaching you about bad stuff that's not supposed to happen.
Agreed.
So all I'm looking at it, it's all lessons.
Yes.
Every chapter is a lesson, what not to do, and what yes to do. That's about it. That's how
it's a good point, and I wholeheartedly agree that a lot of the stories in the Torah, I think, are presented as negative examples. A lot of people will remember many years ago, I gave a sermon on Rosh Hashanah about the Akedah, saying if this is a test, Abraham failed the test.
Exactly.
This is not. So Claudia and then Brad.
But something good can happen.
Absolutely.
Come out of it. Yeah. Okay.
I just wanted to say that I find this Parsha troubling, and this prayer, though, whatever it is you put in front of us, troubling, because it seems to me like it's rooting violence right into the divine.
Yeah.
And by doing that, we give zealots a way to justify their violent actions, obviously, as we know. So what are the efforts that have been done to reframe this?
That's a great question. I think the efforts to reframe it are
לא תרצח.
Yeah, right. I think the efforts to reframe it are saying, at least in the, you know, in our Jewish, in our space of the Jewish world, where we don't necessarily subscribe to Scripture as being divinely authored, it's much easier for us to say this is a product of the time and not a world in which we live in, nor a guide for us to behave. But I will say, to your point, Claudia, you know, people, this is not so much now, but I've had people say to me over the years, you know, when speaking about fundamentalists, you know, Islamic terrorism and things like that, right? And that, you know, the Quran is this book of hatred and jihad and killing people. And I said, well, first of all, no, it's not. I've studied the Quran. The vast majority of it is, just like Torah, is a book about lessons and morals and has nothing to do with killing people, has nothing to do with jihad and any of that. I said, and by the way, I say to them, and I point to this story, we don't talk about it much, but you can find all the same things in the Torah. You know, you're going to enter the land and you're going to vanquish everybody and conquer them and kill everybody who doesn't agree with you. I mean, we have all of it too. You know, I think so. I think as when we're not seeing this as the literal divine word of God, it's much easier to say, well, this is a product of a society and a certain time in history. Hence the fact that it's present in most religious traditions and teachings from, you know, several millennia ago. And I think there are ways to reframe it, and I think there are ways to say, to Panina's point, it's a negative example. That might doesn't make right. Is what I would say. But that doesn't make it any less troubling that it's there. But in the same way, I think we deal with it the same way we do with other troubling texts that are not egalitarian or that place women's roles in different, you know,
Perspective.
Yeah. Jeff and Brad.
One of the interesting things is the idea of a zealot. And actually, the definition of a zealot, in a sense, indicates a certain quality of human without preconceived notions, preconceived plans. It has to be more or less a spontaneous outpouring of an emotion and of an action secondary to those emotions. The fact that it's recorded in the Torah as this story is because it is so rare to find discrete examples of what we would call zealotry with purpose, or the zealotry that's sanctioned, so to speak, by God. Because none of us are without premeditated thoughts and emotions and plans and, you know, ideas of what is right and what isn't right. This spontaneousness, this lack of premeditated action brings you to the need to be closer to God, or that it actually stems in a spontaneous way from that love of God and from that need to, as they say in the Torah portion, this is to protect God's honor, to protect God in, you know, in society, more or less.
Well, I think it raises an interesting point too, the spontaneity of it, that I sort of, because the text doesn't tell us, I sort of wonder 10 minutes later what was going through Pinchas' mind. Right?
You have to know, just as an aside, that the blessing that he received, the third portion of it, is to give him peace,
Right.
which is actually emotional peace.
Yes.
And a sense of calm that whatever he did was, you know, not something that wasn't ordained by God or necessary.
Right. Right. We're going to more about that in a few minutes when we wrap up. Brad.
Well, what I focused on in this passage is the word informer, because if Cosby, the Midianite princess, was indeed being used as an informer, as part of a plot or scheme by her father, this is the justification for killing her, because informers, whether they're being utilized or not, are to be punished. So this is a justification, rationalization for her death. The choice of the word informer, very interesting in this passage.
Loterach means do not murder, do not murder, do not murder. Doesn't matter the reason, okay? So that's why Israel didn't have the death penalty for years and years and years and years, because of people trying to reason why not to put to death another person and not to kill another person. Lo tirtzach, this is it. No, that's it. No matter what this person did, they didn't have the death penalty. And they still don't have it. That's it.
So this says Sidur Ashkenaz. Now, the Ashkenaz were no longer in the Yerushalmi Talmud because there wasn't Ashkenaz then.
I'm not sure I understand the question.
Well, it says this prayer here is Sidur of Ashkenaz, and Ashkenaz are the Germanic people in Europe.
Correct.
So this is in the Sidur, and interestingly, I said a little less, informers were really horrible.
Yes.
I don't know the date of this prayer, but we're talking pogroms, we're talking informers of the Inquisition, and even in Muslim countries there were informers, about transgressions of Jews. So it could mean death and destruction. So I don't know where the date of this prayer. The only thing it does tell us is that it's Ashkenazi, which is not the Yerushalmi Talmud.
Correct. No, but it would still appear, and I don't have one here because I'm at home.
It's a prayer book.
In a traditional Ashkenazi prayer book.
In which case, informers and their wickedness were severe concerns.
Yes.
Because it could cause them to perish unjustified.
It's a threat to the community.
It's a real threat to the community. The Shamoniki pogroms, you talk about the Crusades and then the Inquisition, which affected the Southern Europeans, but it also led to, real,
so kind of to the point though, and I would say that Claudia, you raised this sort of in some ways maybe the troubling nature of this prayer. This is Rav Kook, who says that any sage distinguished for his piety and learning is capable of formulating prayers, breathing sentiments of mercy and love. But such a prayer as this one, and he's referencing the one above, so full of hate and condemnation, is bound to arouse the private feelings of animosity and spite on the part of the author against the enemies and persecutors of his people. Such a prayer must therefore originate with one noted for the holiness and purity of character and entire lack of the passion of hatred. Such a man was Shmuel HaKatan. One could be sure that he was dominated by completely unselfish considerations and inspired by the purest motives, and had removed from his heart all private feelings of hatred for the persecutors of his people. Right? I included this because I thought I don't know. I think it's interesting that I don't know. There's the old saying, right, that if all you carry is a hammer, the whole world looks like nails, right? And part of me wonders, this is speaking about the author, but if you say this prayer every single day, does that frame the way you see the world? Does that engender these feelings of animosity toward those who may be informers or may be enemies?
Well, yes, I would think. It's interesting, Rav Kook said this. Yes, it could. I mean, you say this every day, but I mean, you can flip it somewhat and use a little softer language. Please save me and us and our people from these victimizers.
Yeah.
Please lead them to other paths. Please inspire love in them instead of hatred.
Absolutely.
So you could just, reword it. But essentially, I mean, the dichotomy, I think, is always the hesed, and also the sense of justice. Justice shall you pursue.
Right.
And how do you pursue justice if there are evil? I mean, how you do it is if they're evil doers, you cause them to pay for their evil. So you need both.
Absolutely. Right. I think it gets into, Jeff. Oh, I think you just muted yourself, Jeff.
One of the things that makes this and these stories so unique is that these are such uncommon personality characteristics and courage. The fact that the vast majority of us would see something that we consider immoral, unethical, etc., and slowly sink back into the woodwork and say somebody else will solve this problem for us. And the degree of courage is really what they're highlighting here. That this common man could actually frame himself against everyone else to protect his beliefs in God. There are very few people strong enough, unfortunately, maybe it's just my incorrect opinion, that are capable of standing up for whether it's their principles, religious principles, or whatever, against the masses and taking that direct action. So, I think it's a lesson in courage as well as a lesson in how to proceed in understanding religiosity and motivation and what is right. I may be all wrong.
I agree. I think it highlights this very, very fine line and difficult balance between, sort of as you put it, Jeff, having the courage of one's convictions and not sort of shrinking away from what we believe is right. And it's a fine line, I think, between that and wanting there to be some chesed, some harmony in the world, right? And that, I think that's the, that line, and that's the balance. Absolutely. Okay, here we go. And this kind of gets into one of the more traditional rationalizations, sort of, for Pinchas and what he did and why it's not murder, maybe. So this is Samson Raphael Hirsch says that Pinchas acted meritoriously only because he punished the transgression in flagrato, right? While it was happening, right? And if he had done it after, right? If they're done doing whatever they're doing in the tent and the girl and the guy are walking out and he's like, oh my God, what did you do? No. It's only because it happened while it was going on. And this is supported, right, we're back to the Babylonian Talmud now. Just so you know, if it ever is saying it's Talmud and it doesn't say which one, it's Babylonian. So we're back in the Babylonian Talmud, right? So, moreover, if Zimri, the son of Salu, had separated himself from the woman and only then Pinchas killed him, Pinchas would have been executed for killing him, because it is permitted for zealots to kill only while the transgressor is engaged in the act of intercourse. Furthermore, if Zimri would have turned and killed Pinchas in self-defense, he would not have been executed for killing him, as Pinchas was a pursuer. One is allowed to kill a pursuer in self-defense, provided the pursued is not liable to be executed by the court. Excuse me just for a second as I close the door to my study. All right. My 1-year-old apparently does not like this Torah portion. So, right? So what do we think about this? That it's totally justified because it's actually about I would say the justification here, because it's actually about stopping the act. right?
Well, here we have the legal basis for the
Right.
justification of crimes of passion.
Correct. Correct.
One of the early laws in the story has to do with foreign women being taken into the camp and the prohibition against that.
Right.
And that's the representation of what you do against the law and the punishment consequentially.
Exactly.
Beware the foreigner.
Thank you, Jeff.
So, I mean, is this a distinction without a difference, or does this make a difference?
No, it does not.
Does the timeline make a difference? You say no, it doesn't?
No, life is sacred no matter what. If you have this urge to kill me because I'm doing something that you perceive wrong, it doesn't make it right.
Anybody disagree?
Somehow it's
I
always,
agree.
never mind. I don't want to say that. I'm going to get into too much trouble.
I think never, Jeff. I think that what happened thousands of years ago still happens now. It's just a different timeline.
Same word.
I don't think personalities are personalities. And if they're going to be a fanatic or whatever, I think you would have been that way 3,000 years ago if you were still alive, and you still would have handled things the way you handled it then, now.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of that in today's world, the more I see generational stuff, I see that in a way as depending on what your parents or great grandparents are through the family timeline.
Mm-hmm.
I see a lot of that still occurring.
Yeah, we're not. I think the more we think we're different, the not so much.
The more we're the same.
Yeah. Susan.
Yeah, this is the first time I looked at the perpetrators. We always look at Pinchas and the justification or non-justification of his killing them. And I think these two passages are excellent, that it was in the act of, as Claudia pointed out, of sexual passion. And what do we have today, for God's sakes? I mean, that inspired the Me Too movement, and then the ridding of politicians from office because of the sexual passion and its transgression outside the sanctity of marriage can be very destructive. I mean, both to the perpetrators. Well, I should say to the perpetrators, even after the act. So it goes on. We're talking about that, sexual passion, and God warns about it throughout the Bible. So I'm thinking of that as this here as a stoppage to, or as a warning against it.
Well said. Okay, we're going to go a little further here. We can look at this one. So this is on this same verse, or no, sorry, not the same verse. Because Pinchas had taken the spear with his arm, prayed with his mouth, and struck sinners in their innards. The Torah in Deuteronomy 18:3 provides that the priests receive the sacrificial gifts of the shoulder, the cheekbone, and the innards, presumably. And then just to actually look at that, yeah, Susan, I like that expression, right? So, right, just to look at the proof text, right? This then shall be the priest's due from the people. Everyone who offers a sacrifice, whether an ox or a sheep, must give the shoulder, the cheek, and the stomach to the priest. So here, this commentator in Targum Jonathan Yonatan is suggesting that is because of this zealotry, this honorific zealotry of what Pinchas did, right? That he had the spear in his hand, that he prayed with his mouth, and that he, killed them by stabbing them in their gut. It may be a little far-fetched, or tenuous, connection, right? But this is, I think, again, part of this tradition of elevating Pinchas as this redeemer and keeper of Judaism and of tradition, right? And that in this time of God's fury with our ancestors, it's Pinchas and this zealotry that ends up kind of restoring God's favor on our ancestors. Okay. We're going to go a little bit further, just so we get through. Yeah, we're going to go here. We're going to skip the rest of this text. So we're going to go to the Psalms. Okay, Psalm 106. Pinchas steps forth and intervened, and the plague ceased. It was reckoned to his merit for all generations to eternity. Right? Here's what a great guy he is. Right? And here, a little piece from the, from commentary. This is from the Plot commentary. The Torah states that the crown of God's favor was bestowed on Pinchas, and that because he had shown himself zealous, his descendants would inherit the priesthood forever. This presents the reader with the serious moral question of how such a priceless reward could be given for an act of killing. Pinchas is rewarded not so much for slaying the transgressors as for saving his people from God's destructive wrath. Pinchas' impulsive deed was not merely a kind of battlefield execution, but reflected his apprehension that the demands of God needed human realization and required a memorable and dramatic example against permissiveness in the religious realm. The story further asserts that this was the proper way to halt further religious disintegration and to repair the breach of the covenant. Claudia is skeptical.
Well, I'm not sure that I agree, but I can see the flip side of this, which is an act of violence justified if it's done to save others? So is it okay to kill the one because I am saving others from whatever it is? I don't know that I agree. I mean, but
right.
Yeah, but that would be the flip side of going on here.
Panina, and then Susan.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, I think to change the leader at the time when all this chaos was going on, and then with a point to change behavior, to change a leader would be a mistake. There was enough confusion and enough yes and no of what was happening to all of a sudden also take the leadership away. It's just not smart.
Yeah.
It caused more confusion and more doubt about the leaders. So, like I said, you keep on paying your taxes. Give him the sacrifice and keep going the way it was before. Don't change now. And if there was a time to change, I'm sure it did. It just happened when it was right to happen, or maybe not. But not all the leaders that you pick are always perfect. And yet we don't change them right away. It goes through many, many trials and tribulations finally. And then, even then, you can't. All this business with the not able to impeach and stuff like that, I think that's a reason for not changing leadership, because it's going to cause a lot of confusion. So it's just another lesson. Not a good time to change. That's it.
Susan.
Yes, my reaction was to Claudia, and I take your point. But the killing was not of innocent people to save the all the others. And I think there is justification for killing transgressors and evil people, and particularly if it's going to save a greater number. And I think, I was bringing back to the partisans in World War II, and but that theme has been around. That's what, Jesus was just killing, was to save a greater number of people. And that's modeled on the Al-Qaeda, where well, actually, the precursor would be Isaac, that the Christians believe, but who wasn't killed. But I think this is justified and also the second point is this was an adolescent nation who had just come out of Egypt and had to be shown the correct way. And the perpetrators not only en flagrante in their actions, but also in their sexuality, but also in their actions. This was right, it doesn't just come right after some, first of all, during the plague, but then right after some moral decrees. And they said it, essentially said, so much for you, we're going to do this anyway. And so that, I guess, and then that was worse than the wood chopper who came in right after a moral decree. His death it was kind of strange, but nonetheless, it was a flagrant repudiation and demonstration against the rules. So
yeah, what if the person who told them lied? What then? Maybe he was a false witness, the one who told about the couple that was doing all this.
Yeah, I said that's not as bad as this.
So that's what I'm. So
this
you're not
was right in
supposed to
front of
kill
everybody, where they could see. This was.
It was a flagrant act in public.
Rabbi,
Yes, Miriam.
this was a very interesting. I mean, all of your sessions are wonderful, and I want to thank you for them. Very appreciative.
All right, we can stop right there. Thank you, everybody.
And this
No getting away from Miriam, kiddo.
this brought out so many different things, and I agreed with most everything that everyone said. It will always be troubling to me, and I will never find a solution, and that is the solution, to not find a solution. And that's okay. It should always be troubling. And the word intermarriage has not been mentioned, and I can't help but bring it in. I think what Pinchas did will always not sit well with me, no matter how many rationalizations are given for it. And let it always trouble me. I hope so. Because to take another person's life because they were fornicating is not exactly a solution to a problem. There is no solution to intermarriage except not to intermarry. But that is overwhelming. It is a fact. I personally don't know a family that does not have intermarriage in it, except some of my Orthodox friends at Beth Jacob, where I'm also a member. And you can have someone go to yeshiva, be brought up in day school situations, be very strong, committed Jew, and nevertheless fall in love with someone who is not Jewish. And I'm not saying anything profound and anything new that you haven't heard. The solution to intermarriage is, I have no idea, nor do my rabbi friends, except not to marry a person who is not. If someone converts, they're absolutely Jewish, and that is not a problem. They are Jewish. So this entire chapter of Pinchas will always make me think of intermarriage. The people he killed were not killing others. The people that he slew with one sword and managed to kill both the man and the woman together were not committing crimes like the Nazis. The prayer that we read is somewhat meaningless. God is saying, or one is saying to God, let all those who do harm to Jews be immediately done away with. And Susan brought up Nazism, which we all thought of. And so Nazism is excluded from that. Did God punish the Nazis? Did he prevent 6 million Jews? He did not. And so that's a whole other problem. Nevertheless, I want to wish everyone a Shabbat Shalom and to thank the rabbi, who is wonderful You are. You bring out thoughts from us, which is the way we live. And I want to thank everybody who spoke because I really paid attention to it.
Thank you, Miriam. I know better than to touch intermarriage with a 10-foot pole when we're already over 1 minute over in time. That's could be on the whole session. Brad, I'm going to let you have the last word, and then I want to hit one more text in closing.
Well, I just wanted to come back to this idea of the plague being lifted, because what that reminds us is the Oedipus story. You know, Thebes was under a plague until the crimes of Oedipus had been brought out into the open and he'd been punished. And we have the same situation here, that the plague is not lifted until the sin has been addressed.
That's a great point. And this is to Jeff's earlier point, this text here, that in reward for turning away the wrath of God, God blesses Pinchas with the attribute of peace. That Pinchas not be quick-tempered or angry, since it was only natural that such a deed as Pinchas's should leave in his heart an intense emotional unrest afterward. The divine blessing was designed to cope with this situation and promised peace and tranquility of soul. And then last but not least here, this is early 20th century from Iturei Torah, that after the great zealousness that he acted upon for God, God gives him, Pinchas, as a gift, the covenant of shalom, the covenant of peace. It is as if the Torah is hinting that the path of peace is always preferable and more successful than the path of zealousness and war.
Good.
By the way,
it may
just a side
suggest
note.
also that peace may only come after struggle, turmoil.
Correct. And interestingly, by the way, so it's a text really that only gets talked about much in Orthodox circles, which is Iturei Torah, which is a commentary on the weekly Torah portion, drawing from wide ranges of sources, but was put together in the early 20th century by a guy named Aharon Yaakov Greenberg, who was a member of the Israeli Knesset. And so I think that that's actually an interesting just footnote, given this idea that his suggestion is that the path of peace is preferable and often more successful than the path of zealousness and war, despite that's what is often a necessity in geopolitics. I think that's an interesting dichotomy. So I'm going to leave everybody with that because we're already a bit over time. Hopefully, we'll see some of you in person tonight at the Irmis campus. Susan, you and Bill going to be there?
Am I going to be there?
Yeah.
No,
Okay.
but I'll see you online. I am
Fair
still
enough.
cautious.
I
Fair
wish I
enough.
could be there, but I'll see you online.
Fair enough. Well, I will see you online because I don't think there's a screen for me. We'll see. It'll be interesting. We'll see. All right, everybody. Shabbat shalom. See you next week. I'm back next week.
Shabbat
Stuck
shalom.
with me again next week. You're stuck with
Thank
me
you all. It
again
was
next week.
wonderful.
All right. Bye, everyone.
Great. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat
Shalom.
Bye, Panita.